All right, so quote for today. Now, we've been talking so far, we've been hearing quotes about divine providence. This idea that there's a providential God that cares about the affairs of nations and intervenes in the lives of men, being something that was commonly held and kind of what made Americans who they were at the time. Today, we're going to introduce another one of those values that was kind of central at our founding that we no longer see as part of our national identity. And the term our founders use, again, is gone from our public discussion. It's private virtue. Private virtue, today you would say it's like something like individual morality. It's making the right choice even when no one's looking. I think today most of us here in this room think we should make the right choice even when no one's looking, but we don't have any connection to that to our national identity. This is actually pretty closely connected to the idea of divine providence, because the underlying thought here is that if we're going to expect God to intervene on our behalf and to fight our battles, we're going to have to qualify. We're going to be worthy of that intervention. So here we have Samuel Davies, who after this time will become president of Harvard University. He is, by the way, if you're going to say of all the founding fathers, who's the best orator? Who would you say it is? Do you know who it is? Take a guess. The best orator. Benjamin Franklin's pretty good. He's not the best. Hamilton's pretty good, not the best. We'll take a couple more. Samuel Davies is not a founder. He's one of the best orators in the nation, though, at this time. He's actually the mentor of Patrick Henry. Patrick Henry will learn his oratory style from Samuel Davies. And Patrick Henry, I think, it's kind of undisputed that he's our best orator among the founders. People would say of Patrick's ability to speak that after he was done speaking, you were totally convinced to his side, although you really couldn't remember what he said. It's really kind of interesting. It's a young Thomas Jefferson who's kind of peeking over the wall at what's happening inside the Virginia House of Burgesses when he hears Patrick Henry give a speech against the Stamp Act. Jefferson is really moved and thinks maybe this is the direction I should go with my life. Okay, so here we have, interestingly, so at this point, this is 1758, French Indian War is not going well for the British, and they finally get serious about it, and so they have brought in Edward Braddock. Old school military general. We talked about Braddock's defeat because it featured in a different one. So we talked about kind of Washington's first experience there in the French Indian War. After that, it's tough to get people from Virginia to sign up to fight in the war. The war is so far away, and maybe if it comes closer to us, we'll sign up is the general feeling. That so much so that Virginia cannot get enough of their kind of militia to sign up to go and fight. They can't meet their quotas. And then Samuel Davies gives a sermon, and that changes overnight. It goes from not being able to get enough people to having to turn away volunteers because they don't have enough equipment to outfit them. And at first, when I heard that, I thought, how can that be? I mean, who even listens to a sermon in the first place? And plus, it's not like you have radio. How could that get out? Well, it turns out that back in the 18th century, if you had a good sermon, you kind of gave it from place to place. And if it was good enough, printers would get a hold of it either with or without your permission, and they would publish it, and people would read it. It was very moving. So we actually know kind of the full text of a lot of sermons that happened at this time just because they were printed as pamphlets. So the talk he gives is called The Curse of Cowardice, and he lays out the argument for why you have a God-given responsibility to fight to defend your country. And he does a masterful job of it. He gets towards the end of it, and he says this. He says, here I thought to have concluded, but I must take a few minutes more to ask this crowd, is there nothing that can be done by those of us who remain at home towards the defense of our country and to ensure the success of the expedition now at hand? Shall we sin on, still impenitent and incorrigible? Shall we live as though we and our country were self-dependent and had nothing to do with the supreme ruler of the universe? Can an army of saints or of heroes protect an obnoxious people ripe for destruction from the righteous judgment of God? He's making the connection for us between divine providence, the interposition of God to come and fight our battles, and our responsibility to live lives of private virtue. This is not anything that's new or revelatory to the people. He's just reminding them of something that they already know. Okay, so private virtue. let's go ahead and we got a file to download for today. So if you're kind of looking at September 22nd, beginning file there, schedule 2. What happened to schedule 1? I don't know, but apparently I changed it to make it schedule 2. And so this is what we're looking at today. So kind of what we're focusing on today is we're looking at, what are some of the things we have to think about when we're going to write macros from scratch. In fact, we probably don't even really call them macros when we write them from scratch. We're just going to write a VBA sub procedure. What's the difference between a VBA sub procedure and a macro? I don't know, $10,000 a year in starting salary. I mean, if you're writing macros, big deal. But if you're like writing VBA code, VBA sub procedures, and you're kind of using the correct language, I don't know, you're just kind of putting forth kind of a more erudite impression for yourself. So writing VBA sub procedures. Now, one of the things that we're going to do, and I guess this must actually be actual data from the accounting program. Accountants, raise your hands in here. Maybe these are some of the classes you took. Were you taking any of these classes in fall of 2017, or is that so long ago now that it's way beyond where you were? So no one actually took these classes, but you might recognize some of these instructors who are no doubt still around. So I think I just pulled this data out and said, all right, what we want to do is we want to be able to have a way to look at this and find out which classes are taught at similar times. If we're trying to figure out when could we offer a class that's not going to conflict with as few other classes as possible, we're going to need some way to kind of look at this data. And so I'm not sure that what we're about to do is the best way to visualize this data, but here's my plan, is to say, all right, we are going to create a procedure that will allow us, a VBA sub procedure, that will allow us to like give it a line number. And then that procedure, once we give it that, tell it what line number to operate on, we'll look at this class and say, all right, this class starts at 12:30, goes to 13:45 or 1:45 p.m. Actually, it says 13:45 p.m., which is kind of interesting. Do we have the number of minutes that it shows here? Section. No, so we're going to have to go ahead and kind of calculate that out. And then we just want to kind of highlight some cells in here to change the background color of some cells in here to show what time that is. So it starts at 12:30, so that would be 12:30 to, what is it, 1:45? 1:45, so it would be that. We would want to, basically what we want to do is we want to go ahead and make the background color of that something so that we can see there's a class, that's when that class meets. So we're kind of using this grid that we have here in Excel to kind of show visually what time during the day this particular one happens. Now, this is a Monday, Wednesday class, so we might use a different color for Monday, Wednesday than we do for a Tuesday, Thursday class, which is represented as TR here, versus a daily class and so forth. So we can kind of get a sense for that. Any questions then about what we're about to do? Okay, well, let's get down to it then. I think if we look at the code then that we have for today, we already have a sub procedure built. So of course, if we didn't have this built already, we could just type it in sub and make schedule, but that's right here in module 1. So if you're not already showing that when you open up, just double click module 1 and that will come up. Are we ready to kind of move ahead and take a look at this? Okay. So any thoughts? Kind of help me think about what we're going to do here. Let me go ahead and get us started. So what I have in mind for make schedule, I want make schedule to kind of run through and do the whole page. I want to have it fill out, but kind of simplify things. I'm going to say, listen, there's going to, just like we've done in the example, or hopefully what I've had you do in the Fallen Angel project, is you've got 2 sub procedures. You've got one that actually does all the work for one line, and then you've got another one that says, all right, let's just make this one happen over and over again and keep track of what the conditions are as to when it should start and where it should start and when it should stop. So I think we're going to take the same approach here. By the way, how many of you are finished with Fallen Angel project? Okay, good. So it's due tomorrow, I think. So that's looking pretty good. So I'm going to kind of do the same thing here. So I've got make schedule that's going to be the whole thing, but let's make another one. I'm going to call this make, let's see. I'll just call it do one line. That's not the best name I've ever thought of. That's the one that comes to mind right now. I'll do one class. Do one class. Okay. Now, so far, we've used these parentheses, kind of let these parentheses at the end of a subprocedure just come in automatically without really talking about what they're for. But today we're going to see what they're for. Inside these parentheses, when I'm declaring a subprocedure, there's only one thing I can do inside these parentheses, and that is I can declare a variable. So you know what a variable is, right? So it's a named location in memory where you can put a value in and then call it back later to see what's there. So I can declare a variable inside these parentheses. And when I declare a variable inside the parentheses of the subprocedure, that variable gets a special name. It's also called a parameter. So we're actually making a parameter here. Is a parameter a variable? Yes, a parameter is a variable, but it's a variable that gets its value in a very specific way. So we're going to see that right here. So how do I declare a variable? Let's say I just want to have some variable here to keep track of what row number I want to actually fill in the schedule for. So what would be a good data type to declare this variable as? So it could be a range. We could give it a range. That would work. I think there's probably a simpler one. We just need to know which row to look at. Integer would work pretty well because let's see, how many do we have? So we got to start on row 2. We've got to go to 55. So integer would probably work. What else would work? Byte would work because it's a single byte number. But for me, I say, listen, if I'm referring to a row number, I'm always going to use long because both integer and byte, I'm expecting that at some point, this data might get extended. And so am I ever going to have more than 32,000 classes that I'm dealing with? Integer is probably going to be okay. But see, already I've had to think about it. I've had to think, am I really going to get there? And so what I like to say is, listen, if it's going to be a variable that's referring to a row number, just make it long. Because whatever you throw at it, you can handle with long. Instead of having to say, because how much thought do I want to put into saying, should I save 2 bytes of RAM? I don't want to put any thought into that. Now, if I'm declaring not just one variable, but I'm declaring maybe 1,000 variables at once, which I can do, I'll show you how to do that. I might give it a little more thought. This is a single variable. It's going to be a row number. I'm just going to make it long integer. So I'm going to declare a variable right in here. How do we declare a variable? Dim. Why don't we just call it the row? That would be Henry David, the row, as long. I'll close the parentheses. And when I leave the line, it's going to tell me, hey, wait a minute, there's a problem here. And the problem is that because the only thing I can do inside these parentheses is declare a variable, I don't have to say dim. It knows. The only thing I'm doing in here is declaring a variable. And so I'm going to get rid of the dim. Because it's not only is it not necessary, it's not allowed. Saying, look, there's one thing you do in here, you make variables. And they're variables, they're parameters because they're going to get their value in a different way than we've seen. So far, when you give a variable a value, what have we done? We said the name of the variable equals something else. Now, this one's going to happen a little bit differently. Let me just, for right now, let me just go ahead and do a debug.print in here of the row. Now, the way I'm going to give the variable its value is I'm now going to call the subprocedure that I'm creating here. But because it's expecting, because it has a parameter here, when I call the procedure, I need to tell it what the value of that variable is going to be. So I'll just put 22 here. So I'm just putting it as kind of space and then the next thing after the name of the procedure. So I'm going to say do one class, that's the name of the procedure. I'm saying here's the value to pass to the variable, and the row is going to take on that value. The whole point here is that the next time I call this, I might want to give it a different value. So now when I run make schedule is going to call do one class twice, and it's going to pass a different value to it each time. So the first time this runs, it's going to print what? 22. The next time it runs, it's going to print 13. Yeah, because this variable gets its value when I call the class, when I invoke, or when I invoke the subprocedure. So I'll run this and it should just print off 1322 because all it does is it takes the value in and it prints it. Okay. I remember when I first, kind of in my programming life, when I first looked at passing a parameter or passing an argument, it's called passing an argument to a parameter, or giving that variable there its value. It was somewhat mystical to me, but kind of just show me on a show of fingers from 0 to 5, 5 being I totally got this, 0 being what's the variable, and kind of just show me how comfortable you are with this idea that we just went over. 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, 4, 4s and 5s, some 3s out there. Okay, we'll get some experience with this. This is something we're going to do a lot, but at least the important part here is that this is, I'm just declaring a variable in a special place. It gets its value when I call the function. So if I was to step through this, let's go ahead and just do that. I'm going to do it with F8. So instead of pressing F5 or clicking the play button, I'm going to press F8 on my keyboard. Of course, if you're going to do this along with me, you might have to use function F8 to actually invoke the F8 functionality. Just depends on how your computer is configured. So it's going to go one line at a time. It gets to this one and says, oh, this is a call to that other subprocedure. So it's going to jump down here and it's going to run through this one. And because I called it with the 22, it will print 22. Comes back up to the next line in the main procedure, calls it again, passes now to 13. So the row has the value 13, it prints that out, and then we're done. That's called stepping through code, and it's really helpful. Now, it may be that you have a bunch of code, you don't want to step through the whole thing, like maybe you've got some long loop that's running, so you don't want to hit F8 and go from the very beginning. Well, imagine that I had a bunch of code up above here that I wanted to go past. I could put the keyword stop right here. This is only a thing for debugging, but now I can just run this with the play button, and that will run all the code up to where it says stop. And then from here, I can press F8 to kind of keep going one line at a time. And by the way, if I ever decide, you know what, I've seen enough, I just want to let it run again, just so you can hit play from here and it'll pick up and keep running again. So being able to put the stop, it's called a breakpoint, being able to put a breakpoint into your code, and then stepping through with F8 is really helpful because it lets you kind of go line by line. In fact, let's do this one more time. A couple other things that are really helpful here is that, so right now, this variable has a value. If I hover over it, I can see it shows me that's the value of that is 22. Now it's about to print it here, but I could come to my immediate window and I could just say, I want to print, question mark shortcut for print. I could print the row and it would tell me that. So I can kind of come and inspect, because right now everything is defined, it's up in there in memory, but I've stopped the program so I can say at this point in my code right here, what's the value of that variable, and kind of go inspect that over here in my immediate window. So these are kind of some of the basic tools that we have to help us see when our code's doing something different than we think it should be doing. Kind of go step by step and say, all right, what's it doing at this point? How is it now? Because I think it should be 22. Yeah, it's 22 and so forth. So a couple of questions. Go ahead. So I just hit enter and it shows it. Now, the reason it shows it for me and not for you is because I'm in the process of running this. So let me go ahead and stop my code and let me get there again. So I'll hit play. I get to this breakpoint and I'm hitting F8 to go one line at a time. And now that I'm actually inside this subprocedure, the row is defined. It has a value. So now I can run this and it'll print 22. I'll use F8 to kind of step again. I'll come out of it. At this point, this variable, the row, actually the memory gets allocated when I call the subprocedure. So up there on the line before the yellow one, I say, call do one class, pass it 22. The interpreter goes, oh, you're calling do one class, we got to get some memory. And it asks the operating system for some memory. Give me some memory. How much? It's taking 4 bytes because it's a long variable. It's a long integer. It gets 4 bytes and says, great, here's the address. Now, the interpreter keeps track of the address of that memory and remembers that I'm going to refer to it as the row. And so I don't have to worry about the address, but I get this location in memory now that has the name, the row. And then when I make the call, that's when it gets its value. So right now, if I was to try to print off what is the row, it's going to say, I don't know what you're talking about. Well, in this case, it's going to say, Oh, the only thing that could be is a variable. It's going to actually allocate memory for the variable and initialize it to be a 0-length string. And that's why it's printing that. It's like, it's actually, to execute this question, it's go, I don't know what that is. It must be a variable. It allocates the memory and does it there because it doesn't find the existing one. But if I step into it again, now that will be defined and it will have the value 13 as it received it from the second call into the procedure. Did that answer your question, questioner? Yeah. Next student.
Are you also able to just click on the bar next to the line to make it stop?
Oh, so there's another kind of breakpoint. This breakpoint, the word stop, is a breakpoint written in code. The other way I can do it, and maybe this happened to you before, you accidentally clicked here and this red line showed up and you went, oh my gosh, what have I done? And you clicked again, it went away and you went, oh, whew. Who's done that already? Yeah, see, that's like a few of us. So yeah, that's just a breakpoint, not written in code, but that just says, hey, I'm gonna stop right here. So let me go ahead and stop my code and run it again. Come up here and run this one. And now it stops right when it hits that breakpoint. So you can type in the word stop, in which case it becomes a part of your code, right? You could like save it, it would come back there. If I close and open this, the breakpoints that are just the red ones that I click on here will all be gone. Kind of they're only for the current session. There's a question in the very back.
Yes, so you said click out to explicitly there. So why does the row still not appear?
So the thing is, hey, you got option explicit up here. How come I can do this and it doesn't give me an error? And the answer is because the option explicit only pertains to code that happens inside this module. So I could have another module, even running with kind of all the same programs running. I have another module that doesn't say option explicit at the top. Those variables don't have to be declared, and there is no option explicit for the immediate window. So if I try to do something in the immediate window and it goes, the only thing it can be is a variable, it'll allocate memory for the variable and declare it on the fly while it's going. Other questions? All right. Oh yeah, go ahead.
Can you declare more than one variable in parentheses?
Yeah, let's take a look at that. The question is, can you declare more than one variable inside the parentheses? And the answer is yes. Let me just kind of show what it would look like if I was declaring multiple variables on one line inside the subprocedure. I would say dim x as byte, y as string. We haven't seen this before, but you can dim x as byte, y as string. So you can declare multiple variables on one line just by separating those with a comma. So you say dim and then lots of variable declarations, variable name as type, variable name as type, variable name as type, separated by commas. You can do the same thing inside here. And it really is, the only difference is you don't have the word dim in front. So now I actually have to supply all three of those values. I'm only supplying one for the first variable, the row, x and y aren't getting a value. So if I run this, it's going to say, argument is not optional. Meaning you've got three parameters here. You need to supply three arguments when you make the call. So the argument is the value that I'm sending to the parameter. Question here.
Can we give like the different variables default values?
Can we give them default values? The only reason it would make sense to give them a default value is if I could call it without giving it a value. And the answer is yes, you can. It's beyond what I wanted to show today. It's not going to be painful for you to see it. You can, like everyone else could realize, this is not something we're going to have to learn just now. Who wants to see how to do that? Okay, it's like two of you, so let's talk later. Yeah, because it's a little more complex than I want to get into. But the answer is yes, it can be done. That's the answer. Okay, I'm going to reset the code. Okay, so now let's actually kind of get this to start figuring out what we have to do. So we're passing in a row number, and why don't we just we'll pass it in as we're practicing. Let's pass in row number 3. It starts at 8 a.m. That won't be a bad place to start because it's the very beginning of the day. So instead of having 2 of these where I'm kind of practicing here, I'm going to just have 1, and we're going to pass it a 3. So the idea here is that we're saying that we're going to look at row number 3. And let's see if I can hide some of the stuff that's not important. Section. I'm going to hide all 3 of these. And hopefully that'll let us see this on the screen at the same time. Hide. There we go. All right. So our goal now is to kind of look at the data that we have here. And then what is this? This is 8 to 9:15. So we're going to start here at 8 o'clock, go to 9:15, and then give some color to that spot right there. All right. So let's go ahead and figure out what we're going to need to do. So as I'm just trying to organize what I'm doing here with the sub procedure, let's start by figuring out, we're going to need to figure out what the start time is. Okay, so I may be declaring more variables than I really need to use here, but this is going to at least let me think through the problem. So let me dim start time as a date. So date allows me to handle date time values. Actually, I don't think I want to do that. I think what I want to do is I want start hour. Instead of dealing with a time, I'm going to deal with it as an hour and a minute. So start hour as, now for start hour, hours can only go from 1 to 12 or 1 to 24. So I think I'm going to use byte for that one. And I will dim start minute or start min also as 0 to 60. So that will be also as a byte. All right. So now I've got the row. I'm going to pass the row in here. And I'm now ready to figure out what the start hour is. So the start hour shows in column I. So I'm going to say that my start hour is equal to, let's see, and our sheet is called sheet 1. I'm going to go ahead and reference this with its code name. The code name shows right here, sheet 1. Sheet 1 is inside the parentheses is the name that shows on the tab. If the user changes that, I still want to be able to have my code work. And so I'm just going to go ahead and use sheet 1. We could change that here, but I'm just going to go ahead and stick with sheet 1 since that's what we all have right now. So I'm going to say sheet 1. That gets me to the right worksheet. I will then say cells. Which row number do I want to go to? Yeah, it's row number 3, but what do I want to put here to be able to get to that row number 3? Yeah, the 3 is going to get passed in here. So when we call this, we're going to pass a 3 to the row. The row now is a variable holding that 3. This time, the next time it'll be 4, and after that it'll be 5. So I'm going to use the row to get to it. Which column am I going to use? Have we shown yet that you can use these? You can use a letter here instead of a number for the column. So in quotes, you can put an I here, or you can put 9. Which one do you like, I or 9 for this? Yeah, I agree. The I's have it, apparently. Oh, there we go. Dot value. Okay, so if I ask for the value of that, what is it going to give me? Yeah, 1230p. And is that actually a time or is it a string in there? I think it might be a string. That's okay. So it turns out that there are some built-in functions that will be really helpful to me here. So one is called, well, let me just show you a couple of these, MON. Actually, let me first show you this function called now. Now returns the current time from the system clock. I can ask just for the year. So there's a function called year that says, oh, just give me the year from whatever time you've given me. And here I've given you the time from the system clock. Well, I can also ask for the month or the day, right? But I can also ask for the hour, and I can ask for the minute. Maybe it's minute, M-I-N-U-T-E. So you can get the second as well. Yeah, you can ask for the seconds as well. So this is my start hour. So I'm just going to call, this is going to, now you saw that if it's actually a time expression, it will do it. But watch this. I'm going to take this that was printed out as a time expression, and I'm going to put that as a string right here. And it's still going to get that 30 off of it. Because what the function does, and remember, this is common of VBA. It says, listen, I'm expecting you to give me a time here. I really want to operate on a time. You gave me a string. Before I complain and say, hey, you gave me a string when I was expecting a time, VBA is going to look at that and go, I wonder if I could convert that string into a time. It's going to try to do the conversion first. And when it's successful at doing it, it says, great, I've converted into a time. Now I'm working with a time. I can go ahead and pull the minutes off. So even though it's expecting a time, take the minutes off, it is more than happy to take a string and do the conversion inside of that function. How are we feeling about the ability to extract a minute off of a string that represents a time? 5, okay, good. Yeah, someone gave me a thumbs up. Is that yes? Is that a yes or is that a 1? I don't know. So yeah, let's go with 5. Excellent. Okay. So my question is it going to work if I've got a time just the way that it's showing there, 12:30? So let me take this one without the year. It takes that one just fine. Let me get rid of the minutes. It's still figuring it out. Now, what does it have? It's got the P right up against this. I'm not entirely sure it's going to figure that out. Who thinks yes? I really don't remember. Who thinks no, it's not going to work? Let's find out. Oh, it's able to figure it out even there. So it's really doing some nice complex, checking in there to say, yeah, I can figure that one out. So that's going to make our lives a little bit easier here. So now I think if I run to this point, let me go ahead and just put stop in here. And I'll run. So I hit play from right here. Why does it put this dialog box up here when I hit play down here? My insertion point is right down here by the stop, and I hit play, and it's just not running this procedure. Why not? It doesn't know what the row is. Right now, when I call this procedure do one class, to be a legal call, I've got to give it a value for the row. Saying, listen, you told me to expect a value for the row. And if I'm just running it, there's no value there. And so it says, I don't know what you want to run, but you can't run this one. So I'm going to give you a list of the things you can run. And so in this case, there's only one to choose from. So that makes it easy. So I'll just hit enter and that should run. Ooh, type mismatch. Oh, it's because I never put the minute. Like this is still kind of that whole expression. And I need to come in here and say minute around it. Oh, thank you. We're on hour. Okay, so now we've gotten to the stop and we can see that start hour is 8. I wonder if it's going to work on this one that's like 1345p. I'm just going to give it a try. 1330p. Yeah, still likes that. Okay. Oh, which hour do you think it's going to come back with? Hopefully it comes back with 13. Yeah, good. Questions? Okay, we should be able to now get the start time. We got the start hour. Let's go ahead and get the start minute. So I'm calling start min. And now it's just going to be minute looking at that same cell. One of the neat things about the, minute, M-I-N-U-T-E. One of the neat things about debugging in VBA is that I can just drag this right back up to that line and it'll run it from there. So I can hit play. I can see what start min is. And it's coming in as 0. That's right. Starting at 8 o'clock on the hour, no minutes extra. Okay. One of the common feedbacks that I get in this class from students is, oh, Professor Allen, we come to class and you just lecture to us the whole time and you show us stuff. What we would give for an in-class exercise of some kind, anything. So here's your in-class exercise. Give me an end minute and an end hour variable. So just go ahead and adapt the code, So that you've got it, you're getting and defining the variables, getting the values for end, minute, and end hour. I will give you 2 minutes to do that. I think you can do that in 2 minutes. Raise your hand when you have it done. Just flash me already. So it's more like 2 seconds for some of us that have been a little more experienced in coding. Got it? Okay. Got it. Good. So it looks like our first ones are getting done in about 30 seconds. Yeah.
The first end time is 13:45, right? But you also have like other PM times that aren't military. So we thought get a different hour.
Oh yeah, so good question. So we got this down here on line 27. We've got a 1:45 p.m. Is that going to give me 1 or is it going to give me 13? That's your question, right? My guess is it's going to give me the 13. Yeah, and that's because it's not looking at the string, it's converting that string into time, and then it's taking that. About 20 seconds to go and we'll move on. Oh, how nice. I thought it was going to make a loud sound. Excellent. Okay. So how many of you are saying, I'm not quite there, but I'm headed there, and I think I could probably do this? How many of you are saying, already got it done? Yeah, okay, it's most of us. How many are going, I'm not quite sure how to start with this? Some of us here? Okay, so let's go ahead and see what I would do. So I'm going to go ahead and say, listen, this code's going to be pretty similar. So instead of starting from scratch, I'm going to go ahead and paste it in. I'll have an end hour and an end minute. Same thing here, kind of pulling it off will be similar. So now my end hour will be something similar. My end minute will be something similar, but instead of looking at I, I'm going to look in J. So I'm going to change my column to J. And that'll give me my ending hour and my ending minute. Questions? Okay. So now we need to figure out, kind of have to convert this time, start hour, end hour, start minute, end minute. We've got to do a couple things. One, we have to figure out where to start highlighting the cells. And two, we have to figure out how many of these cells to go. So it looks like, I've got the hour here broken up into 4 different columns. So I got to know how many 15-minute blocks we have. So we got a couple of ways that we can do this. Let's go ahead and get the start column. So let me declare a variable called start call. Start call as, I'll do this as an integer. And again, kind of the same reasoning here. How many different columns can I have? I'm on the very last column there. Let me just ask what that is. So what is the column of the active cell? UMN. Oh, sorry. Active cell dot column. It's a property of the active cell. It's not a function. So 16,000 or 16,384 columns. So what's the smallest data type that I can use to refer to a column? And be sure that I can get to all of them. As an integer, can I use byte? No, can I use integer? Yeah, because it goes to 32,000. I got room to spare here. So I'll use integer for the start column. So now, how am I going to figure out the start column? In fact, I'm probably going to put it after I figured the start hour and the start minute before I get to my end hour, just because I don't need the end hour information to calculate this part of the problem. So how am I going to calculate what the start hour is? So it's got to be, I got to convert that into a 12 because O is the 12th letter of the alphabet. So my start hour is 8. And when it's an 8, I got to make this number to be 12. When it's a 9, yeah, 4 more. It's got to be 16. So how should I do it? Start column is going to equal what? Give me some thoughts here. Go ahead.
You don't know the number of the column, O, and then you multiply the number of hours by 4, and then the number of half hours, 750 minutes. So, the number of minutes you have to divide by.
Okay, we're going further than I wanted to hear so far. So, but you said, yeah, we're starting here in column 12. So anything that's 8 o'clock or higher needs to be 12. So what should I start? How do I say, all right, so how do we say if it's 8 o'clock, we start at 12? So if my start hour is 8, which is what I have for this example, 8 needs to map to 12. So it should just be 4 plus my start hour. Is that right? Oh, because my start hour, let's see. That'll be wrong for 9. Here's what would have been really good if I had thought through this problem just before I came to class to think about this, because it's a little harder to think up here when you're all looking at me. Say it again, 4 times. Okay, so what you're saying is let's convert our start hours into blocks, right? Because an hour is going to be 4 blocks. So let's take 4 times my start hour. And I'll go ahead and make sure that happens first. And then we're going to subtract 20 off of that to get it back down to 12. That might be right. Let's just go ahead and run it and see what it does. So my start column right now is showing as 12. Let's see what happens if my start column is 9 instead, or my start. Oh, yeah, let's just change it here to 9 and see where that's going to start for us. And now our start column is 16. So yeah, that's it. Excellent. Let me go ahead and put this back to 8, which is where that class starts. Okay, so now based on our hour, that's going to get there, but now we also have to move a certain number of minutes. So how do I convert the number of minutes that I have here into the number of columns that we have to advance by? Pretty easy on this one because it's 0 minutes. But what if it was starting at 12:30? I would have to advance how many columns? Yeah, I think that's right. I think what we're going to do is we're going to take that expression. We'll go ahead and bind that inside of parentheses to make sure it happens first. And we're going to add onto it my start minutes divided by 15. So if I have 0 divided by 15, it's still 0. If I have 15 divided by 15, it's 1. 30 divided by 15 is going to be 2, and that's going to get me advanced to the right place. So now I think I've got my start column figured out. Well, I think my end column is going to be pretty similar, and though we could probably kind of convert like the difference in the time into a number of columns to move over, let's just go ahead and figure out what the end column is using something similar, although it may take a little bit of adjustment. It might end up being off by 1. Let's find out. So we'll need a variable called end call, and we'll do the same math with our end hour and our end minute. And I'll put my stop now down here after I do the end. Okay, so before I actually check what that end column is, I want to see what I think it should be. So it should end in, there's 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. I think it should end in, number 16 should be the ending one. And this is showing me 17, yeah. So I think what we need to do is just subtract 1 off of this whole expression. And it's because if we had one that was only 15 minutes long, it would start and end in the same column, and our math would actually tell it to push it 1 column over. So that should give us an ending column. So now all we have to do is we now know the column that we have to highlight to, where it starts, the last column that we're going to highlight, and now we just have to do the highlighting on that. That should be pretty easy. So we're going to have kind of a whole day where we talk about how to work with the range object, kind of a whole day on dealing with ranges. So let's get a little preview here. So our sheet is sheet 1. Dot. Oh, actually, I'm going to show you a kind of a different form of this. Let me do it right here first. Range, and then you've seen so far that you like just put an expression inside of this, right? A1. But there's another form of the range that allows us to say, you know what, we want to do a multiple cell range. We can say A1. A couple ways we could do it. We could come in here and say colon B1. That would be those 2 cells. And I'm just going to print off the address here. Oops. So that it figures that out and says A1 to B1. But I could also say, instead of giving it 1 string there, I can give it 2 arguments, 2 different cells as a string, and it will kind of do the same calculation. So 1 string that gives it the expression, or 2 different strings will give you a starting and an ending. But these strings don't need to be strings. They could actually be references to cells themselves. So range A1. Right, this is itself the whole expression to the whole reference to a range, as is this one. And we'll also kind of figure that out. So now that we've got these columns, I'm going to say range and the first cell that I want to refer to, I'm going to use the cells method to get to. So I know we've used cells so far. Cells, I'm going to give it a row and a column. What row do I want to do this on? Yeah, the row, the variable that I passed in for the row, which in this case is 3. And the column I want to do to start in is my start column. That's the first argument that I'm going to give to it. The second argument I'm going to give to it is my end column. So it's a little bit of a complex line. So let me highlight the first argument here. So I'm saying I'm going to identify a range. And what's the range? First of all, it's going to be, I'm giving it 2 arguments to the range. The first one is where it starts. The second one is where it ends. And so now from range to range, that should be that range. I haven't told it what sheet it's on. So what sheet will it assume? Assumes the active sheet. I don't really want to assume the active sheet here. And so the temptation is going to be to come in here and say, oh, well, this range is on sheet 1. That's the wrong place to do it. Instead, we're making a range that starts on sheet 1 here and ends on sheet 1 here. And so now that identifies, now we don't care what sheet's active. When I run this, it's going to put this onto the right sheet. It's going to put it on sheet 1. That line's getting kind of long. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and declare a range variable. So dim RNG as a range. And then I will set RNG equal to that range. And then afterwards, I'll go ahead and do the background color. RNG. Now, how many of you already know how to set the background color of a cell in VBA? I would expect very few of you to know how to do that. So if you're trying to figure out how am I going to set the background color, what would you do? How would you figure it out? What's step 1? Yeah. Google would be 1. Don't do that. Just record yourself doing it. And you would find out that there's going to be a property called, a cell has a property called interior. The interior has either a color, which is some number between 1 and 16 million, or color index, which is some number between 1 and like 52 or something. INDEX. So I don't know, probably something like 4 will be a nice color. I'm not sure exactly what 4 is going to do. Let me go ahead and step through this with F8. And when I run this line, it should color a particular cell. And it looks like something went bad here. So what's my start cell? Start call. Let me see what the address is for RNG. We're still in debug mode here. Yeah.
I think, I'm not sure why you were subtracting 20. I think you should subtract 12. That's where the error is.
Let me stop this and run it again. Doesn't quite seem right because it seems like it should have been off further than that. So it might take us a minute to get that math correct.
But if you put 12 another one, start.
Oh, for the, I did the end.
And then start.
I'll move my stop down here. Yeah, so for line 3.
Professor, you also have to account for the hidden cells.
Say it again.
You have to account
Oh,
for the hidden cells.
it's the hidden cells. Oh, that's what I was counting wrong from. That's right. I know this is 10. And so O is much further on. So let's just ask what the active cells column is. Thank you. So it's not, so 12 is not what we're after, it's 15. So my start hour times 4 gives me how many were in there. So that should be minus 15 times 4. It's minus 17. There we go. Okay. And the truth is, it would take me a little bit longer to kind of think through this and probably get a pencil out and make sure I'm understanding just what's going on here. But I think once we run this, we'll see that that's going to do the trick. All right. So let's go ahead and run that with a different one. Let me go ahead and like run the next one in there. So after 3, I'm going to do 4. And is that, yeah, starting at 11, going to 12:15, 11 to 12:15. I think I'll just use a for loop to put this in, although it might make more sense to do a do loop. Which one do you want to do, for loop or do loop? We haven't done much with the for loop. Let's do the for loop. So let me dim R as a long integer. And we'll do for R equals 2. Well, go ahead and hard code that now as 55. Next. And then we'll pass, whoops. Oh no, I hit help. Oh heavens. And now we're going to put R here. So the first time through the loop, this is going to evaluate to 2. We are going to pass 2 down to the row, and we'll do this on row 2. The next time through will be row 3, then 4, then 5, and so forth. We'll put an expression in here to calculate what the last row should be, but for right now, we'll just hard code it at 55. And I'll run that and get rid of my stop. And I'll get rid of that stop. And now it's given me kind of visually where each one of these happens during the day. Go back up to the loop. Questions here? I can scroll down for more than a second. How far do you want to go? That's kind of the end of the code there. Questions? Let's go ahead and calculate what the last row is. So let me declare another variable up here in my main procedure called last row as a long. Then before we run the loop, we're going to calculate that. So last row equals, Now I'm going to start at what I'm going to do is I'm going to start at the very bottom of my worksheet. I could start here at the top and move down, like control down arrow. I'm not sure that have we talked about like moving to the end of blocks of data through VBA? Oh, excellent. So, or I could start way down here at the bottom and hit control up arrow. And that would find the cell with the last date. Which one do you like better? Start at the top and go down, or start at the bottom and come up? Top down seems easier. Yep.
But if there's space in data that could miss some start.
Yeah, so what happens if, I'm looking here, if I'm expecting there to be any kind of break in the data here, if I start up at the top and come down, I'm going to stop at that break. And so it really just depends on how the data is configured. So if I'm sure, well, we'll do it both ways. If I'm sure that there's always going to be data in that first column, then I'll go from the top down. So last row, I'm going to start at the top cell. So I'm just going to say, what sheet am I on? Sheet 1. Sheet 1 dot, we'll just start at range A1. Because I know kind of how I'm going to change this code in a minute, I'm going to use cells 1, 1. And then from there, I'm going to say, now, to understand the reason this next Word is the way it is, I'm going to come back to Excel for a minute. So how do I get to the bottom of the bottom of the data? Control down arrow is what it does. Before they invented the control key, cast your minds back before the control key was ever invented. Well, that's a long time ago. How would you do this? And it turns out you can still do it this way. So I'm up here in A1, I'm going to tap the end key. It's a 2 keystroke sequence. I'm going to tap end, and then I'm going to hit down arrow. So 2 keystroke sequence does the same thing, end down or end up for control up. Now it used to be that it puts something down here at the bottom when I hit end. Let's see, end. Oh yeah, look at that. Okay, so we're going to look right here on the little status bar right here. I'm going to hit end, and it tells me I'm now in end mode. So now if I hit down arrow, it behaves differently. I'm in end mode. Down arrow means something differently. It takes me down. Now, the whole reason I showed you that is, so you could move around in case your control key gets broken. No, it's so you'd understand that's the reason why they said end. So the method here is called end. And then I tell it a number as to the direction that I want to go. And XL down is like a predefined number. So that is going to say, starting at a particular cell, do control down. Okay, so XL down is like a pre-built-in variable. It's like a variable that's already, it's just a named location in memory that has a value. It's -4121. I could put -4121 in there and it would do exactly the same thing. I'm not going to do that. Because the whole reason they gave us a name is when we look at the code, we can go, okay, they're moving down here. Now, what I'm really interested in is not the value that's in that cell. So understand what we have here. This refers to a sheet. All of this part refers to what on that sheet? This refers to a bigger cell, A1. And then we're calling the method end of the range class. So the A1 class has a method end. The A1 object has a method end, and it knows what to do. So I'm telling it, move down. And then this whole thing is going to refer to a different cell. Which cell does this whole expression refer to? Yeah, like A55. I think it's row 55 is what we get to. But what I'm really interested in is I'm interested in the row from that cell. And so now this is going to, we're looking at this sheet, go to this cell, call the end method that refers to a different cell. And now give me the row of that cell. And that should be the last row that contains data. I can now change the hard-coded 55 to last row. And now, it reads 55. If there's more or less columns next, or more or less rows next time, it'll still pick up and read the right rows. I'm just going to go ahead and change the color here so we can see that it's different. So instead of color index 4, I'll put color index 5. And we'll run. And I have to declare that variable. Oh, I have to just spell it right. I'll change the spelling here. And so now that goes through and does all the right data. Questions? Yeah, I'm going to do this. This is kind of a complex line. So let me go ahead and highlight the first argument. So the way that we calculated the last row here says start at the top, move down till we bump into, till we find the last contiguous cell of data. Now, it could be that there's a potentiality for missing data in there. So moving down might not do what I'm after. But if I know I've just got the one table on the sheet, I can start at the bottom and come up, then that might be a better approach. That's really a pretty simple modification to what we have there so far. You ready to do it? How many cells are there on a worksheet? I mean, how many rows are there on a worksheet? Like 1.04 million. But I can actually just, ask. Rows, let me identify the sheet. They all have the same amount, but let me just make sure we're talking, it's a method of a sheet. Sheet dot rows dot count. There is 1.04 million rows. So I could, if I want to refer to the last row, I could take this value. Oops. I could take this value, and instead of starting in column 1, I could just plug that in for right here. That's now talking about the very last row, column 1. Or I could just take this expression and put that in there. That says the very last row on that sheet. Which one do you like better? I don't know. I tend to do this way because I imagine that sometime in the future, Excel is going to get more rows. And when I get more rows, I still want to have my code think of, yeah, we're going to the last row. So now, instead of talking about the first row, this is going to identify the last row or the last cell in the first column. So what do I want to do? Yeah, instead of going down, I want to go up. And let's go ahead and change our color again so we can see it happen. We'll go to 6. Let's hit Control Z by mistake. 6 is very yellow. But that identifies the same thing and takes me to the same row. So I can either start at the top and go down, start at the bottom and come up. Just depends on what you know about your data, which is the better approach to finding it. Questions? So what we've seen today then, kind of the big thing is a little kind of some practice in saying, we're just going to solve this little problem here. And we got to kind of think through how are we going to get to the right columns that we're interested in. But the kind of couple of things that we introduced, one, dealing with ranges, multi-cell ranges. 2, being able to navigate to the end of contiguous blocks of data. So using the AND method. And then 3, building our own sub-procedure that now can take, that has a parameter so that when I call the procedure, I give it an argument. So the argument is the value that I pass to it. The parameter is the variable that receives that value. Are there any more questions? Uncharacteristically, we're going to be done like 5 minutes early today. I know you're heartbroken. Thanks for coming. Class dismissed. Oh, that's the new policy. When you end, at least 3 minutes early, you're going to clap. That's what it is.